In today's episode, bringing a database back from the dead,
But it sounds risky.
If you do it right.
demonic device crashes,
The word is sulfur crystals growing up.
Wait. Sulfur crystal?
and did we just avert the destruction of Earth?
A black hole, right? I mean, and Earth is gonna vanish.
Welcome to Cisco Tech Stories. A podcast with real-life stories from real-life engineers. Your hosts are Nicholas and Tristan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cisco Tech Stories podcast, a podcast where we interview experts in Cisco CX and more. We learn about new technologies and we hear fun stories about troubleshooting as well as interesting cases. I'm your host, Nicholas, a technical leader in wireless, and here with my co-host, Tristan, technical leader as well. Hi, Tristan.
Hello, Nico. Good morning. It's nice to speak to you again. Today's a bit of a special episode as this is planned to be released on 1st of April. So let's have a bit of fun. So today we will have 3 short stories for you with 3 different guests, fantastic guests from Cisco Tech, right? And 2 of those stories are true and 1 is false, 100% invented. And we'll let you guys guess which one is which. For that, please reach out to us on X, so Twitter and LinkedIn, and tell us your guesses. The answers will be published on next month's episode, so stay tuned. Thank you.
Today, our first guest is Jaroslaw from Poland. Welcome, Jaro.
Hey, Nico. Hi, Tristan. Welcome. Thanks for having me here.
Tell us about yourself a little bit.
My name is Jaroslaw Gawron. People call me Jaro, or in Poland, Jarek. I'm principal engineer in Cisco CX delivery team, where I support enterprise products. Nowadays, I mainly focus on software-defined access solution and also my first love, which is catalyst switching platforms.
I believe you have a story about a human mistake and a nationwide impact. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. So my story, as I support SDA, is related to SDA domain. And it's one of the incidents that happened in TAC in the team supporting the SDA solution. Not sure how much our listeners are familiar with SDA access, but SDA access involves several key components. The main one to highlight is the DNA center orchestrator. And of course, solution itself also leverage the Catalyst 9000 switches, which can serve different roles within the architecture. The DNA center orchestrator takes care of the conversion of the intention expressed by the network operator and translates this into a configuration lines that are pushed into each individual devices. And of course, DNAC, as we recently rebranded to Catalyst Center, possess the knowledge about the general network topology and also includes the configuration of every single involved device. And the story that I wanted to share with you today begins like in classic Hitchcock movie, with a major earthquake shaking the foundation, and from there things are only getting worse. So some time ago, without giving any specific details about the time or revealing the customer name, let's refer to the customer as a customer X. Customer reach out to TAC and open service request for an issue with their DNA center that manage a very big SDA network consisting of literally close up to a few dozen of different size and almost a few hundreds of individual devices. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was a really big network. So for customer X, everything was functioning well, except a minor issue where a device that had previously been removed was still visible for one of the sites. This was described as a minor inconvenience from their perspective. And upon initial review of the symptoms, the engineer that got assigned to this case quickly linked the problem to a known software issue. It was some sort of a corner case scenario involving a combination of several factors together related to a type of device, the software version that was used, and then of course a sequence of events that led to this problematic state. The internal database of DNAC accumulated some temporary entries that should have been deleted, but unfortunately these entries were not removed. And that, of course, led to some inconsistencies between tables and resulting DNAC displaying some inaccurate information.
So more or less cosmetic so far, right?
Yeah. So problem at that point was quite cosmetic. So the problem was recognized, tag engineer linked it to a defect, and in a defect had a precise recipe of fixing it. And the recipe required execution of a specific SQL query. And as you know, typically in majority of the case handled by tag, a WebEx session would have to be established. The customer shared their screen and remotely connected to a jump station within their internal network. From there, they accessed via VNC another station installed in their data center adjacent to the location of DNAC. And from this location, the customer logged into the DNAC and shared the access to DNAC shell for the tag engineer that handled that.
That's not a normal procedure that users should be doing, right? SQL queries, that's like getting root access and fixing it manually like a mechanic?
Yes, absolutely. Normally we don't do these kind of things, but I mean, it was a software defect. Something went not according to intention when it comes to the internal DNAC processes, and we had to fix it. The only way to fix it was through removing these entries. Right, and engineer performed the due diligence, confirmed the issue, match all the symptoms, performed a various verification step that, indeed there are these stale entries present in the DNAC database. And, once all these things were confirmed, started to apply the fix. And the process began. And the fix required a manual execution of SQL delete command, something like delete from table X where device ID equals, and here they were supposed to, the engineer was supposed to provide these individual IDs of stale entries. And this was the procedure that engineer had performed several times before, right?
If you do it right, but it sounds risky.
If you do it right, exactly. But as in every plain disaster, it wasn't just a single factor that led to catastrophe, but a series of different factors. Here, before executing the final delete command, engineer double checked or even triple checked everything, all the outputs, copied the correct IDs, and unfortunately, while pasting the final delete command, it turned out that instead of executing delete from table where, only delete from was copied, and this entire part where, which was supposed to filter and limit the delete query just to few IDs, ended up with deleting all records from the table, removing not just the stale entries, but all valid ones as well. And as it later turned out, this was a main table including all IP pools used by hundreds of networking devices in this customer network. So the issue that initially appeared as a minor problem with some information not being correctly presented quickly turned into a situation where end customer suddenly could no longer use DNAC to orchestrate its network. The network was still running, but the end customer could not deploy new sites nor introduce modification to sites that were already deployed. Right? There was no network outage.
I want to clarify something there because I think there's a difference between SD access and non-SD access. Catalyst Center can be a regular automation center, a management station for non-SDA, and then if you lose it, it's not too much of a problem because each device still has its own configuration and you can keep configuring the devices directly themselves. But in SD access, Catalyst Center is the main brain and orchestrator, and you're really supposed to use it to configure things because it takes the complexity away from you in the config, right?
Correct.
That's the difference between the two situations.
Correct. There was no network down situation, there was no network outage. Everything was still functioning, right? But no changes could be made. right? And as we all know, especially in large organizations, network is a living organism that undergoes constant changes. And we kind of understood that this is a ticking bomb that needs to be fixed quickly.
And we're talking about nationwide network, right? So no go.
Right. So, when the situation happened, the TAC engineer followed all the required procedures for such a situation. The SDA team manager initiated the special process for this, for this kind of situations. A kind of all hands on deck meeting was arranged. And of course, the best DNAC, SDA, networking tech leads were pulled in, both from TAC side as well as from engineering side, to brainstorm on possible ways to fix it. And at the beginning, I told you it's going to be Hitchcock story. The initial conclusions were not very optimistic. It seemed that we would have to delete the part of deployed configuration for each individual site in order to recover the missing table. And executing this process would require sending engineers to every single site, arranging maintenance window, to delete a part of the config and then restoring it using DNAC back again. And
which is not realistic. Yeah, okay.
Yes, exactly. And considering the scale of customer network, the number of devices, this would be a multi-month project. And even with the assumption that we would spend 1 day per site, it would take months.
Impossible.
Which is not realistic, absolutely. And of course, we knew that this was not acceptable. And it was less about the cost associated with it, but more the time during which the customer would simply not be able to make any changes to its environment. So we had to get creative. And this was the moment when truly all the best minds were called in. I wish I could say that it was me who figured it out, but that wouldn't be true. So it was truly a team effort to find a way to restore this information. Slowly but steadily, step by step, the missing IP pools began to be restored. From relations that could be observed in other table based on some redundant information, from the DNAG logs, kind of logging the actions that were performed in the past, also from the configuration of individual devices. And as a result, after more than a week of continuous efforts, lasting almost 24 hours per day, the entire state of the drop table was restored. We managed to achieve 99.9% restoration in a completely transparent way, without any impact to end customer, without the need to send anyone to any site. At the end of this, let's say, first week, what was missing were just a couple of IP pools that were there, but were not actually used. So we could not have a good information, for example, from network devices, where these pools were used. And in the end, what initially seemed like an epic disaster with a huge potential impact turned out to be solvable within 2 weeks. And again, the final effect would not have been possible without the TAC team and engineering team working together, hand in hand, working on, there were literally hundreds of different efforts working on recreate of the problem in the local lab, testing data, verifying the entries, verifying the procedures, writing a scripts. And eventually something that was supposed to be, epic disaster, impossible, turned out to be possible.
Nice, right? Because I'm sure if you ask the developers, can we rebuild the database? They would be like, no, it's not possible. But then what would be the alternative? There's no alternative, right? Let's try to do it anyway.
This was completely uncharted territory where all the things had to be figured out, for the first time. This kind of situation didn't occur in the past, and the whole process had to be figured out from the scratch.
But also, reassure me, with a proper disaster recovery plan and backup, this should not have been needed, right? This is just a series of bad luck that led to this.
As I told you, like in every catastrophe, there's no one single factor. Here, customer did not have any valid backup. Customer was so sure that since they have the HA cluster, if in case of failure of one node, they will still have two others operational. So, well, they didn't really care about doing a periodic backups. But of course, when you do a changes of
When you delete the database, it synchronizes the deletion, so it
it
deletes
gets
everywhere.
immediately replicated everywhere. So the fact that they had the HA cluster was simply irrelevant for this particular case.
Cluster good, but backup good as well. Do both, right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
The other lesson is that CX has your backup. When you have the right people to support you, you're safe. That's good to know.
I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure that was one of the lesson learned coming out of this incident.
I'm sure that this customer is now the most backed up customer ever.
Absolutely. For me, there are three takeaways from this incident. First one, only those who do nothing don't make mistakes.
For sure.
So that's the first one. Second one, as an individual tech engineer, I might not know everything, but as an organization, I'm sure we are unbeatable. And, you will not be left alone even if things go south. And third one, when we work together, the question isn't if a problem is solvable, but when it will be solved. And, this is one of the occasion, one of the example that proves, all these three things for me. And I've seen many others in my previous history as well.
Thanks a lot. That was a great story. Is it true or not? We will know next month. Thank you so much, Jaro.
Thank you, Jaro. It was great. Okay, so let's now welcome our next guest, Ivan. Good morning, Ivan.
Hello, Tristan. Hello, Nico. Good morning to you.
Hey, nice to have you here. Maybe if you want to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what you're working with, and then we can go with your story.
Sure. My name is Ivan Shirshin. I'm technical leader in Cisco Data Center Tech. I work in different technologies through my years at Cisco. I think it's been more than 16 years that time really flies. And currently I'm focusing on the Nexus standalone type of the networks, data center, EVPN, VXLAN, and so on. So this is currently my primary technology. Through years, I worked with other technologies, starting with Catalyst years ago. But currently, I'm in the data center space.
And what story do we have for us today?
I've been thinking of some interesting stories, and this one was one in, let's say, a list of interesting cases that I have of the things that I've seen from the customer issues in the past. And the story is actually related to the older platforms. I'm not sure if you remember we had a platform in the past, 76 router platform, which is currently end of life. But the story happened years ago. And the way it started is that the customer actually came to us reporting that they're seeing some errors, looks like a hardware issues, in the syslog of the box. Syslog are the login messages that we are logging important and critical, but also informational notification on the router. And the customer started to see some problems and also some effect on the traffic on the router. So taking the case, started investigating on what's happening. What we found out is that the system was reporting the problem with the goal tests. And the goal test, it's abbreviation, and what it means is generic online diagnostics, right? So this is a number of tests that the platform runs internally to check the system state. So it's checked like the health of the system, are the components working properly, some loopback tests to check the health of the ASICs, of the internal chips, and so on. And after checking what exactly is failing, which tests are failing, a number of which are running just periodically, we did find out that there is a problem with one of the ASIC, which was a clear indicator that the line card has to be replaced. And the 7600 is a modular box, so it has a number of supervisors and line cards, and so it was a big box. So RMA was sent, replacement to the customer, the line card was successfully replaced, and everything was fine. But that was just the beginning of the story. What happened is that the case was successfully resolved. The customer confirmed that everything fine, but 3 months later, the customer came back to us, opening a new service request and reporting that they are seeing a similar issues in this part of the network, and they are suspecting exactly the same box. So that's when I started wondering what's happening from that point of view. We started to trace the flow. Now it was a bit different symptoms. The way the customer reported was that there was a forwarding issue. So there was a problem with the packets being sent. They were lost in the network. And we were tracing with the span, checking the forwarding lookups, going hop by hop to narrow down where exactly it's happened. Because when you're working in a network and you have, let's say, the packet forwarding type of the symptom of the problem, one of the important steps is to narrow down to specific node. And as you can guess, it was narrowed down to exactly the same box. So we went to look into the box, looking in more details of what happens with the packet forwarding inside the box. And we did find that, the hardware on another line card on the same box, but same type of line card, is dropping the packets. And replacing from spares did fix the issue. So it looks like another hardware failure. But 2 times on the same box within a few months, we started to get suspicious of something really going to miss.
What went through your mind there? Because we had one such story already, and the suspicion there was how they were replacing the part, right? They were not replacing it correctly. They were frying the part they were putting in the box. I know in wireless, when we have this, we're suspecting the power network there may have issues. So if typically it's the power supply for us that just keeps failing, like every month or so, then they probably should ground their material better, etc. What went through your mind at that time?
One thing that we were suspecting is that maybe the problem was related towards the static electricity when the line card was replaced. So maybe it was fried some chips. Or one thing that we also explored if there is any problem with the back pins on the back plane of the chassis. Because this chassis, it has the pins and you had to carefully insert to make sure not to bend them. And but the thing that also when this happens, typically the line card just does not come up. If you have a bent pins, that most likely the card would not work, right? Because it would have much more severe problem. So while we did make sure to check those type of symptoms, it was not the primary suspicion, let's say, of what was going on. What we were thinking about, kind of what was the main theory, is that potentially that was a bad batch of the line cards. So maybe something related to manufacturing and customers really unlucky to get, let's say, 2 line cards. And this is where we went to the BU to check, do we know anything, it's any kind of certain trend for those serial numbers? And the answer was no. So everything was fine. BU was not aware of any issues. We also checked among what we know about other customers, and that was also all okay. So none of other customers reported continuing trend of the line card failures of this type. So that was a dead end at this point. So the line card was replaced. We had only 2 line cards failed at this time, but surprisingly in the same box. So we decided with the customer to keep it under the longer monitoring for 2 months. So keep the case open, keep the monitoring, and if something happens, then we'll have this direct connection, so we can address the problem immediately and look into what's going on. Can you guess what happened in 1 month and a half?
It failed.
Almost. So you're close there. It failed, but it failed on the neighbor router of the same type with same type of the line card, but not on this exact box. But again, the primary suspicion now was that something is happening with these specific line cards, specific line card PID. So again, we started to look at what's going on, and the symptoms were very close, but every time a bit different. So we had like a certain test failed, or there was a certain ASIC drop in the packet. So dropping because there was the problem on the ASIC. but not exactly the same. So it was not like we had exactly the same failure every time.
Is it that often you get like complete failure, the part stops working, and this was unusual that the part keeps working but start to have, it fails forwarding, it doesn't work 100%? Does that happen a lot, or?
Typically, the hardware failure, I would say, is either there is the report of a certain ASIC failure and this ASIC doesn't work, or there is a line card failure, which means that it's, for example, powered down. That's what we typically see. The things such as there is, let's say, the packet drop on the ASIC because of the ASIC issues, hardware issues, I would say it's pretty unusual. So if there is a hardware failure, it's typically either the component failure or the hardware report or the online diagnostic reporting the hardware test issue. Or, well, the worst case is that the line card will not come up. So from top of my memory about this platform, this 7600 series, um, that was kind of
So it's unusual it happened once. It's even more unusual that it happens three
three
times.
times, exactly. And third time was even on the other box, right? Not on this one. So at this stage, all of those were pointing to something happening with the hardware, right? So all the symptoms investigation that we've done, check of the tests, check of the status of the periodic diagnostic that the system is doing, everything points to the hardware, right?
Yeah, I think what's important to highlight is that it points to hardware, but hardware in this case would be the symptom, but not the cause, right? I think it's pretty clear at this point, correct?
Correct. Yes. So
something else is causing those
the
failures.
the question was to find out why. So what is the root cause exactly? And for that, what we used is at this stage we took the line card which was experiencing the problem, and we sent it to the EFA. EFA, it's yet another abbreviation, which is engineering failure analysis. It's a special type of the hardware lab tests that can be done by Cisco in the Cisco labs. That are triggered typically by the business unit, so by our engineering. Whenever the product development wants to take a look into which exact component failed on the line card, like which chip and so on. It has a number of tests, different level of depth and complexity, including some X-ray tests. So it's really goes in deep to verify that, okay, this specific chip is failing and so on. So at this stage, we moved into this direction, and we set the line card for this type of test. We provided the customer the replacement, of course, to make sure that they don't have any impact because of this. And after some time, the result from the EFA came in with the basically what they found out. And that was, I think, the largest surprise. I probably would never be able to guess that without receiving those tests. And what they found out is that on the line card, on the motherboard, there were these sulfur crystals growing up. A very small.
Wait. Sulfur crystal?
Sulfur crystal, exactly. So very small particles of sulfur, but they were accumulated on the electronics. So it's like similar how you grow the salt crystal in the water, right? Not sure if you, as a kid, if you kind of played around with that. So this is something that was happening with sulfur on the electronics, on the chips of those line cards that were failing. And I think this is a very, I don't think I've ever encountered a case like this. So that was one of those. But yes, the sulfur was seen on the line card.
So that's the part where you ask the customer, are you in a data center? Are you in a mine, a sulfur mine or something? Like, I forgot to ask you what was your activity.
That's
the part
exactly
where
what we did. We went to the customer and asked, can you explain us what kind of environment your site is in? So where are your boxes are located? How does the site looks like, right? And so on. And indeed, it was some faraway site, and the customer did a site survey. And what they found out is that the air in this location where those routers and switches were sitting it was contaminated. So it was not much, but there was this sulfur contamination in the air. And slowly over time, so like I said, it was failing maybe every few months, right? So slowly over time on the hot electronics, these particles of sulfur in the contaminated air, they were slowly oxidizing on the line cards until it was short circuiting the board.
That reminds me of a funny thought. We call it a computer bug because the very first computer had bugs that literally went into relays, blocking them and causing defects. Imagine this would have been called sulfur crystals instead. That would have been funny, right?
that would be more interesting.
But I hope this was an unmanned site, right? Because if people are breathing there, that must not be good.
It was. And that was also an issue that nobody noticed that because it was a manned site. Nobody really noticed aside from a bit of smell, right? But otherwise, it was unmanned, and nobody was checking the air quality and so on. I guess the moral of the story is that the air quality is important not only for humans but for the electronics too.
So the solution there was what? Like change your data center, build another site, or
Well, the solution was that they actually worked to isolate the site. They also implemented the new air filters in the site. So essentially, it became a closed-off air conditioned environment as a result, and that fixed the problem. So we did monitor for a few more months with the customer to make sure that everything is fine. But the problem after that never reoccurred again.
amazing. Okay.
So no sulfur anymore.
Ivan, you said you had more stories. I think we're going to invite you back to hear the others. So thanks a lot for telling us this story.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. So looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, Ivan.
Our next guest is Rik Boven. Hello, Rik.
Hey, Nicolas. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. Can you introduce yourself in a few words or sentences?
No, okay. So I'm Rik. I joined Cisco in 2000, so quite a while ago, as an engineer. Eventually became team lead manager. Now I'm a senior director. That means I'm leading the tech in Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
And that includes us. So
Correct.
we know you. Okay. So I think you have an older story for us from back in the days you were not a director yet.
That is correct, right? Although older makes me feel really old. But yes, it's a story from 2008, quite a long time ago. And it starts really benign. I was an engineer and a case comes in and a router crashed. Now that happens specifically when you're a young engineer. You get those cases, happens quite a lot. So nothing special. That means I started doing my standard router crashes. So you look for existing bugs. And it turns out it's a memory error. Now it's a standard ECC parity check. And it's, again, no big deal. You have many of those when you're on shift, kind of in the CATS team. It's called all the time, right? And the typical line of thought is if it happens one, you're just bad luck, kind of keep going on. If it happens twice, RMA the box, right? So that's what I did, right? And during the day, a few of those come in more, right? I mean, kind of so a few more come in, and it's a bit weird, right, already, because it does happen, but not that you can as a single engineer take a few of those per day, right?
Could be coincidence, could be bad luck.
Could coincidence, because it could be related to what they call a solar flare, right? I mean, so the sun from time to time emits these high particles, and if they
are those real? Because we always talk about cosmic rays and solar flares, but is it a legend or is it true? Because I don't know.
It's actually true, right? But it does feel a bit like a legend, and I know there's a bit of conspiracy theories going on with this. But if some of those solar flares hit your device, actually a bit in your memory could flip, and if enough flip, then you kind of have a crash, and our devices kind of get hardened for that. But there's always a statistical risk, and with the install base of Cisco, it does happen, right? So as a single customer, it doesn't really happen, could never happen to you in a lifetime, but with our install base, it does happen. Now the weird thing with this one is the cases kind of kept coming in from our customer base in Europe, even when it was night, right? I mean, so you came up the next morning and there's cases waiting. This happened last night, right? I mean, it's a router crash. Now, if it's solar flares, if it's night, the Earth is actually pointed away from the sun, right? I mean, so it kind of very difficult, right? So we're engineers, we start to be curious and we start to correlate that information with the rest of my team and say, hey, did you see it? Yeah, saw that too, what could it be? And it's difficult, right? I mean, so we started troubleshooting, favorite in the morning. We live in Belgium and we like to drink beer, but not in the morning. So we drink Fristy, right? Not that that's really relevant, but it just gets your brain juices going. And there is a pattern that we start spotting though, right? All of these came from Switzerland or France, right? Actually, the moment you start drilling down more and more, you start noticing that all these cases come from the Swiss-French border, which is weird, right? Which is weird, and the craziest ideas start talking about coming on the table, right? Including, can cowbells have an influence on our memory? You never know, right? But then you open up the newspaper and there's the article about the Large Hadron Collider being started up again after maintenance being done on it, right? I mean, and then you start thinking, right? The same article, by the way, I don't know if you're old enough to remember that when they started that thing, there was also conspiracy theories on it's going to start a black hole, right? I mean, and Earth is going to vanish. That didn't happen, right? I mean, but it does emit radiation, right? So we went to go and check. Eventually, actually, we got in contact with them and kind of go like, look, could some of that has happened? Could you haven't been having an influence on the customers above ground? If you don't know what the Large Hadron Collider is, it's a tunnel 30 kilometers long in diameter, quite deep, I think 1.5 kilometers, although that I don't know by heart, right? I mean, and they do high particle beams to hit each other and simulate the Big Bang. So they do build small suns, kind of in the Alps. So we got into touch with them, and they first laughed at us, right? Kind of like, what are you making up? Until we kind of gave them our data, and we correlated our data with that, and they see, oh, there's a bit of a pattern, right? And to cut a long story short, they did find that one of their tubes down there, and I'm not a physical engineer, right? I mean, so physics engineer, but one of their tubes, kind of cooling tubes, was broken, and there was a small particle leak, right? I mean, but that's how we actually didn't solve just the customer's devices crashing. We actually solved the scientific study in the Alps in the Large Hadron Collider. So
that's pretty awesome.
That was for sure not in the news, right? Because that would be scaring people. People are already scared about the black hole thing. They probably wanted to downplay it and just like, yeah, it's nothing.
Yeah, kind of. I thought it was a super great fun kind of to be part of that. Whether or not on the CERN that was a big deal or not, I'll leave that to them to judge, right? But for sure, we drank a lot of Fristy, right? I mean, on that later in the day, or something stronger. But I still remember that story every time I meet a new engineer and I tell them what can happen in TAC. Here's an example.
And they don't believe it. Like, oh yeah, he's just an old guy ranting about stuff. But we have a collection of those stories.
Yes,
what the podcast is about.
There's many more kind of where this one came from, right? I mean, where the most unbelievable stuff happened. It's a bit like a parity error, right? They don't happen frequently, but they do happen. If you work here long enough in TAC, you have some really awesome stories that nobody will believe, but they're actually true.
Crazy stuff.
Thank you, Rik.
No, thanks.
It was great to have you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of the Cisco Tech Stories podcast. We hope you like this special format. Reach out to us on LinkedIn or X at Cisco Tech Story to let us know which one you think was the fake one. Take care and see you next month for more tech stories.
Hello, Rik.
Hello, Nicolas. Nice to meet you.
Nice to have you.
No, sorry. Go ahead. I'm not meeting you.